Thank you so much, Honorable Chair of this session, my co-panelists and respected members who are here for this particular session. And thank you so much, Dr. Avinash Pandey, for this very interesting presentation and your views on the linguistic diversity and the issue of mother tongues in it. I will be speaking on nationalism, sub-nationalism, and transnationalism in India. As generally a well accepted or generally understood definition of nationalism says that what constitute nationalism, or what can enthuse the process of nationalism. There are majorly four elements that are considered to be highly important. The first one is that of a stable community of people, that people with a common bond amongst themselves, they should be part of each other's life for a long period of time. That is the first very important element. The second is that of a common language, that those people who are part of each other's ecology, they speak generally a common language. The third is that of a continuous territory, that these people who are part of one of each other's lives, of each other's ecology, and speak common language, they also should have a continuous territory where they are residing, a common territory that on which they are residing. And the fourth is that they are having their shared economic life, that their economic interests are woven together, and they are kind of codependent on each other for their economic sustainability and also for economic for their economic progress as well. At the global level, these are the generally accepted parameters of constitution of a nation state, and the nation state can come in existence that would give rise to the process of nationalism, or inwardly in the other way, the process of nationalism can give way to constitution of the nation state. But in either of the case, these four elements are considered to be highly important and necessary for the constitution of nation state and for any kind of nationalism or the nationalist movement also. This has been observed, and particularly in the case of India, this is very much true, that even if all of these elements would be present, these four elements in themselves or together would not be able to constitute a sustainable nationalism without acceptable ideology, an ideology that would be acceptable to the overwhelming majority of the people, and those people finding a common cause amongst themselves. Now, in the case of India, it was the anti-colonial struggle that was the common cause that had brought people together, the common cause of freedom from colonial power. And it was this common cause that has infused the nationalism in the common territory and on the stable community of masses, and to some extent who were sharing economic life, but with a major exception that they were not having the common language. And despite the fact that they were not having the common language, nationalism, it thrived in India because of the common cause of freedom from colonial power through the anti-colonial struggle. And in this context, this is important to understand that while many would credit the British for bringing the Indians together, or for putting together what we see today as a India on the map. But on the other hand, this is also important that after departure of British, what kept the Indians together, or what kept this map together, was the common bondage that they could form during the freedom movement. In the absence of the anti-colonial movement, in the absence of the common desire for freedom from colonial power, after the departure of the colonialists, the British in the case of India, people of such diverse backgrounds, they would not have been under the common influence of nationalism. And this is a peculiarity that one could see in terms of Indian nationalism. What continued, or what sustained it after the independence, was the ideology of inclusiveness of Indian constitution, or which could be termed as the constitutional nationalism in India, which is at the center of the idea of India from the time of India's independence. Now, the question that could come is, why do we ultimately need nationalism? What is the requirement of the nationalism? Now, historically, it has been seen that nationalism can be the need of the haves in the society, or the elite or bourgeois sections in the society, to keep everyone together, to make everyone work for the economic development of the particular territory, region, or the country, to ensure economic progress of particular region or the country. However, in such kind of economic development and progress, the inequality and economic exploitation can continue. So there is a one type of nationalism which is driven by the bourgeois interests, or the interests of the elite in the society, which in many countries in the 19th and 20th century, this kind of nationalism, it had its way. On the other hand, the inclusive nationalism is based on the concepts of equality, justice, and fraternity. And it can, or it would like to create a social, political, and economic order to end the exploitation and establish equality and harmony, wherein everyone can work for their own progress and for the overall socio-economic development and political representation of all the social groups. Now, in India, we do see a constant contestation between these two types of nationalisms. One type of nationalism that wants to put a blanket on diversity, differences, inequality, and exploitation. And the second nationalism, the inclusive and constitutional nationalism, that wants to address all of this through dialogue, accommodation, and flexibility. And because these two types of nationalisms, they have been coexisting in India. A dominant nature of nationalism and an accommodative nature of nationalism, because both of them have been coexisting in India. The contestation between them have created space wherein sub-nationalisms have thrived in different parts of India. Along with that, the reason for thriving of sub-nationalisms in different parts of India is the nature or the processes through which nationalism in India has emerged. The process of anti-colonial struggle, and what was the nature of society before colonization of the Indian subcontinent. Before colonization of the Indian subcontinent, what we consider today as sub-nationalism in different parts of India was a better reality, or was a concrete reality in comparison to the Indian nationalism. Or prior to colonialism, we could say there exists nothing of the sort of the Indian nationalism. But the regional identities, regional cultures, and regional economic interface, it certainly existed. And therefore, during the colonial process, more than there was a ground for thriving of sub-nationalism than that of the overall Indian nationalism. And it because Indian nationalism has taken the route of being inclusive and accommodative and flexible, the sub-nationalisms, they remained, they existed, they thrived, but they really did not overpower the nationalism, overpowered the Indian nationalism, particularly in the post-independent period. In India, broadly speaking, two types of sub-nationalisms exist. The first one is that of a linguistic, ethnic, and regional sub-nationalism. And a subcategory of it is that of the regional and cultural sub-nationalism. The linguistic, ethnic, and regional sub-nationalism could be seen amongst the Punjabis in Punjab, Kashmiris in Kashmir, Nagas in Nagaland, Tamils in Tamil Nadu, etc. And a subcategory of it, the regional and cultural nationalism, would be seen to some extent, if not to the extent of subnationalism that exists in amongst the Kashmiris or Nagas or the Tamils, but to some extent amongst, say, Marathis in Maharashtra or the Biharis in Bihar, or recently we have seen a similar kind of development based on economic necessities in amongst the Haryanvis in Haryana, wherein whether it's the subnationalism in Maharashtra, subnationalism of Marathis in Maharashtra, or Biharis in Bihar, or Haryanvis in Haryana, while they are using a common regional and cultural identity along with language. However, the economic necessities and feelings of economic deprivation are at the base of this nationalism. The second type of broad subnationalism in India is that of the subaltern or subnationalism of oppressed sections of society, wherein the marginal downtrodden groups in the society, such as tribal, scheduled castes, women, the marginalized OBCs, or in the recent period, the LGBTQ community, they would like to get prominent place in the discourse of inclusivity and development in the nationalism. And they would like to remold, they would like to reshape the nationalism discourses in the country so that their interests and their concerns and their identities would get a prominent place. Now, both these type of subnationalism, they not only exist in India, in South Asia, but in many other South Asian countries. These two broad type of subnationalisms, they do exist. Now, in the case of India, and so as in the case of few other South Asian countries, a potent dynamism exists between the broad nationalism and these subnationalisms, wherein both these categories, they wish to keep each other at a safe distance without divorcing from each other. So the nationalism, particularly the Indian nationalism, to a great extent, it has realized and it has accepted the place of subnationalism within Indian nationalism, even though the Indian nationalism remains highly concerned about subnationalism that exists in different parts of India. But at the same time, the Indian nationalism has accepted the reality of subnationalism in India. And on the other hand, the subnationalisms in India, they also have accepted that they have to work in the under the broad contours of constitutional nationalism in India. And thus a very potent dynamism that exists between nationalism and subnationalism from the time of the independence. This situation would continue as long as India sustains as a one state, or rather for India to sustain as a one state, this is one of the key requirements, that nationalism and subnationalism, they should have this potent dynamism between themselves. And this is true for few other South Asian states as well, prominently for Pakistan, wherein the Sindhi subnationalism or a Punjabi subnationalism or a Baluchi subnationalism, they do exist. In Sri Lanka, Tamil sub-nationalism, it does exist, which sometimes takes a form of demanding or take a form of a full-fledged nationalistic movement. In Nepal, the Madhesi sub-nationalism, it does exist. Thus, in these countries as well, who also who also have been in the process of fomenting and stabilizing their nationalism from the mid 20th century onwards. They also face the similar dilemmas and dynamisms between nationalism and sub-nationalism. Because of coexistence of nationalism and sub-nationalism, uh, in the South Asian context, the possibilities of flourishment of transnationalism also exist. Although transnationalism is not in existence in any practical way at a moment in South Asia, even though there are a lot of possibilities for coming in existence of transnationalism. Now, what could be termed as transnationalism? The transnationalism is one could explain transnationalism in a way that while maintaining the broad contours of nationalism, a particular region or a particular community, it may get integrated with a particular region or particular community in the other nation state or in the other contours of nationalism as well. And there would be overlapping of two two frameworks of nationalism, or there would be quasi-merger of two sub-nationalisms under the broad two frameworks of nationalism. A possibility that exists in the context in the context of the complexities of South Asia. Since the establishment of SAR, many attempts have been made for integration of the region by keeping the nationalism as a base of each member state. However, those attempts have failed miserably, and it is very clear now that integration of South Asia, whether a cultural or economic integration of South Asia, is not possible, or it is not in the foreseeable future, if we keep nationalism as a base while initiating the process of integration of SAR on the lines of ASEAN or on the lines of European Union, etc. That it would lead us to the dead end. However, there exists a scope for regional integrations based on sub-nationalisms. There is a potent possibility, a real possibility of economic integration of regions across the nations. If not economic integration and free flow of people amongst all the countries of South Asia, but certainly economic integration and free flow of people between one region of India and another region of another South Asian country is quite possible. For example, economic integration and free flow of people between Tamil Nadu and Tamil dominated areas of Sri Lanka is possible. The economic integration and free flow of people, or if not completely free of people, to a great extent comparatively easier movement of people between West Bengal in India and Bangladesh. It is quite possible, and it is quite feasible. Similarly, taking a step ahead, and a certain movement has been initiated with this regard of promoting trade between the Kashmirs on the two sides, the Pak occupied Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir. And through that ensuring economic integration and more interaction of people and exchanges of people and trade between Pak-occupied Kashmir region and the Jammu and Kashmir region. Similarly, on the same line, the Punjab region in India, where Punjabi sub-nationalism exists, and the Punjab region in Pakistan, uh, between these two regions, based on the common language, based on the common economy prior to independence and the common history prior to independence, the economic integration and exchange of people between Punjab in Pakistan and Punjab in India is much more feasible. And this is the possibility that the sub-nationalisms that exist in South Asia and particularly in India, that offers with regard to promoting transnationalism in India. India or the Indian nationalism may not be much comfortable with regard to having transnational processes with whole of Pakistan or with whole of Sri Lanka or with whole of Bangladesh. But Punjab and Kashmir could be much more comfortable. West Bengal could be much more comfortable, and Tamil Nadu could be much more comfortable with regard to having transnational economic and cultural processes with the with the neighboring regions in the other countries. And this is the possibility of transnationalism that exists because of existence of sub-nationalism in India. And this transnationalism in South Asia would be impossible without Indian nationalism taking the initiative with this regard, because the transnationalism in South Asia can flourish only if India as a connecting country, and in South Asia, India is the only country that is having a direct geographical connect or the direct approach through sea to all the South Asian countries. And therefore, without India, this transnationalism in South Asia, it cannot flourish. Now, in the last 30 years, we have seen that more or less all the countries in South Asia, they have accepted the basic controls of globalization. Post 1991, which could be termed as the era of globalization. In this era of globalization, all the South Asian countries, they wanted to be part of this process of globalization. They became part of this process of globalization. However, in the South Asian countries, we could see that South Asian countries could not harbor, they could not harness the fruits of globalization to the extent that they imagined 30 years ago. There could be many reasons for that. However, one of the reasons for this, for not harnessing all the benefits, all the fruits of globalization, is that while these countries, South Asian countries, they have accepted principles of globalization at the global level, but they are extremely hesitant to accept and implement the principles of globalization at the regional level, and particularly two principles of globalization, that is the economic integration and free flow of people, or at least a better exchanges between the people, the better processes and convenient processes for the for the working people of both the countries to cross the border and work at each other's place. These are the two key principles of globalization, without which globalization cannot work. And these two principles, the South Asian countries have been extremely hesitant to implement these two principles in South Asia. This is a huge contradiction, resulting in South Asia not gaining much from the processes of globalization in last 30 years. Many would say India is an exception and India has gained a lot from the processes of globalization. However, when we think of India as a gainer from globalization, it is only few regions in India who have been extremely in the forefront of being part of the globalization or receiving the benefits of globalization. And many regions in India, they are practically not part of this process of globalization. And therefore, India as such, as a whole, we couldn't say that has been a beneficiary of globalization in last 30 years. Thus, transnationalism in South Asia, it offers opportunity for the nation states in the region to maintain their national identity and sovereignty by broadening and integrating the spheres of sub-nationalisms that are existing in neighboring countries along with their own. The integration of sub-nationalisms between the countries, amongst the countries, that could be the way forward for sustenance of the of nationalism in South Asian countries. And this can be feasible only if Indian nationalism becomes inclusive, not only within, the inclusiveness not only for within, but the inclusiveness for outside as well. In fact, when we think of what all the nationalism can do, or why do we ultimately need nationalism? So obviously, to keep people together, people having common bonds, people having common interest, common cause, and it's the nationalism that can keep them together, that can make them to work to achieve common objectives. But at the same time, one of the very important functions of nationalism could be to influence the people and communities outside one's sphere of influence, to influence those people who are outside our sphere of influence to be like us or to be part of us. This could be too ambitious to think of them to be part of us, but certainly nationalism can influence the people far abroad as well to be like us. Our nationalism, the Indian nationalism, it should be and it can be attractive to others to an extent that they would like to be like ours, like they would like to follow the nationalism that we in India follow, or they would like to develop or mold their nationalism on the lines of our nationalism. And this is something that actually would not be extraordinary or something that would not be happening anew at the global level. In the 19th and particularly 20th century, many nationalistic sentiments in many parts of the world, they have influenced nationalist movements in many other parts of the world. The philosophies of French nationalism and French Revolution, the philosophies of American nationalism and American constitutionalism, the philosophies of Soviet Union's economic development, and the economic nationalism based on that economic model, all of them have influenced nationalist movements in different parts of the world. The Indian nationalist movement itself, the Indian nationalism itself, was greatly influenced by these nationalist movements in different parts of the world that have taken place in different during different time period, but whose influences remained on intelligentsia, on the society at large. And today, the challenge for Indian nationalism is to be more accommodative, more flexible, and to emerge as a role model for the societies, for the countries, and for the nationalist movements elsewhere in the world. This is a challenge and this is an opportunity before the Indian nationalism, wherein by accommodating the sub-nationalisms within and by promoting transnationalism abroad, in particularly in South Asia, Indian nationalism can emerge as a new model of nationalism for the entire world, wherein today, after 30 years of globalization, the world is struggling to find out the best model to follow. The globalization, the processes of globalizations, they have failed to overcome the nationalism and nationalist sentiments. They have failed to overcome the Westphalian system. And therefore, the processes or the reverse globalization, the processes of reverse globalization have begun. And there is an uncertainty where exactly we are heading. And in this uncertain period, the Indian nationalism has this opportunity of creating a model based on more flexibility for sub-nationalism and promoting transnationalism in South Asia. Thank you. With these words, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much.